Hi, and welcome to the Route to CISO podcast. It's me, Chris Rides. I'm going to be your host, and I'm going to be chatting to seasoned Chief Information Security Officers about their career journeys. We're going to be unencrypting their real-life stories and searching for the hidden keys to help you fast-track your cybersecurity career. First of all, thank you very much for joining me, Meg. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. We had a wonderful talk a couple of weeks ago now, when I was wandering on a beach up in Bellingham before a conference, chatting away. We were lucky to have no rain up there, and you were telling me all about your experience. So I can't wait to hear about that and share it with our audience. I would love to just start with just a overview of, where you are now and a little bit of a bio, please.
Sure. So I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for Principal Financial Group. We are a global Fortune 500 financial services company. Our world headquarters is in Des Moines, Iowa. I have been at Principal for the length of my career.
Excellent.
So very unusual for people to stay in one place for that long, but it's been great.
I love that. And I think that's what part of this podcast is about, is bringing people that have had all different experiences. And as somebody that traditionally has spent a long time, my first sort of real role, I was with that company for 14 years. And then I started my own business and have only done that. So I'm kind of a long stayer generally with things as well. And I think with a lot of people talking about moving on and having to do this and move every couple of years, it's great to hear from somebody that's done something different from that and still achieved their goals, because that is 100% an option, and people don't need to be moving around everywhere to get what they need necessarily.
Yeah, good point.
If you find the right employer.
That's right.
Good stuff. Well, let's crack on with a little bit about how you actually started in cyber.
Sure, I would classify it as a little bit of a happy accident, although I have days that I wonder about that, right? I'm the second CISO at Principal. I like to tell people that the first one was also female, which I think is indicative of our culture here. I actually began my career as a COBOL programmer. We used to call them programmers. Now many will call them engineers or developers or devs.
Yeah.
So over the years, I was in that area of the company for quite a while. I worked on our health insurance IT team, and so did a variety of things, including overseeing an architecture team, a quality assurance team, as my career expanded. And one of the later places that I landed was health claims. And so back in 1996, a pretty impactful act came out, the HIPAA Act, so Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, I believe.
Yep.
That was probably my first foray into truly understanding data privacy and encryption and some things that are alongside of security, but I never thought about it as cybersecurity at all. And so I did that. I stayed in that area of our company for roughly 20 years or so. And then I had a very intentional conversation with my leader at that time, who was the chief information officer for that area of our company. And I was aware there was a way to put your name on what we call the rotation list, people who were interested in a new role, or maybe it would be good for their career to get them into a new area of the company. So I very intentionally said, hey, put me on that list. We had a brief conversation about that. And then a few months later, I was interviewing for the CISO role. I will tell you my experience working in a part of our business, a business area, having that background of application development. And I was also a consumer of shared services. That's been very valuable in my role as CISO to kind of step on over to the other side and understand how the development teams across the company think about some of the shared services and specifically security.
I love that. I think, we said about just a moment ago about finding the right company, the fact that you've got that sort of open to move and you can put yourself on that list without it looking detrimental, right?
Correct.
I think that's something, that's a an attitude that I see in some companies, but not a lot of them. You know, a lot of them you kind of don't want to tell your boss that you're necessarily interested in doing something else,
Right.
and I don't know whether that's something that companies need to encourage more, or people need to be more confident in doing so. And it's hard balance. I guess it depends the company you work for as to
Yeah.
how open that is.
I think it's probably both, right? And it's probably going to depend a little bit on your leader as to how they
Hmm.
take that news, as well as how you time that, right? You don't want to
Yeah.
be running away from something. You really want to be running to something new.
Yeah, yeah. I guess you've done everything you can where you are, and that excitement about being involved in something else, but wanting to stay with the business is 100% positive. People want to have amazing, retention. They need to be able to offer these kind of opportunities, and actually at the RSA conversation that I had, that certainly came out of that as well. I guess the ability to look within your business and see what skills and experience you have there already to use is a really powerful thing for any company to do.
Yep.
Now,
Great way to recruit.
yeah, excellent. Now, prior, you said you were in COBOL Kicks. How did you even get into that? Did you go to college? Were you like what was
Yes.
your route to that?
Uh, I went to the University of Iowa and got a degree in management information systems. And
Hmm.
that was very much informed by one of the jobs I had when I was at the university. I was previously, I think I was initially an accounting major, and then I switched to finance, and then I switched to MIS. And when I was working, I worked for office in the University of Iowa, and it was very paper and process intensive. This is
Hmm.
back in the 80s, and they got a new computer system. And as I sat there at my desk, I had to learn the computer system, which was very easy from the job that I had as a 19, 20-year old. And I had lots of feedback for them on, like, can we put this here? Can we change this around? Like, just the process of building a computer system that would help
Hmm.
improve things, make them more efficient, help the line that formed outside my desk of students. I worked in the Office of Student Employment, so there was always a big line at the beginning of the year, beginning of the semesters. So it really improved things and made them go fast, and just piqued my curiosity in overall using computers to improve processes, which was the theme back in the 80s, right? We do a lot
Yeah.
more with them now, but
Yeah, and I think that theme just goes on. It's just a different technology now, especially at RSA, as you know, you were there.
mhm.
Everybody was AI crazy, right?
Oh
Everybody's
yeah,
building AI into everything, and everybody's got a co-pilot and blah blah blah. And I think probably similar to back then, it's about, right, how can you use whatever the latest technology is to make something either better for the customer or better for the user, or a more efficient process for the company. So
exactly.
that ability to sort of, probably, I'm sure you've used that multiple times since then, but the confidence and the ability to feedback, and probably even the passion to want to make things better, when you carry that through your career, it helps you in so many different areas. And it's probably a skill set that people want to build if it's not something that necessarily comes naturally to them.
Right. It's all about, like, why are we doing this, right? And when I started at principal, to be quite honest, I really didn't anticipate being a programmer for very long. I didn't want to actually do the nuts and bolts of the programming, but was
Yeah.
very glad that I did, understood really all that is problem solving, right? And figuring out what's the best way to do it, what happens when you have a problem, because of course I made mistakes and learned from them, and then started to work more with our business people and to truly understand what problems are they trying to solve, and then how can we apply technology to those problems. So was a programmer for a short time, and then eventually got into leadership, and what we called at that point systems analysis, and things like that.
So how did you? So that's what I was going to ask you about next. The leadership, because that's a challenge for a lot of people. They're great individual contributors, but
Hmm.
they aren't necessarily getting the chance to become a leader. And now some people don't. Some people want to just stay technical and focus on that, and that's great. This being the Route to CISO podcast, I'm going to assume that most people on here are looking to move their career in a leadership
Hmm.
way. How
Yep.
did you make that first jump into a leadership position?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I will tell you, I just always expected to do that. Early in my career, I had the opportunity quickly because the IT team was growing by leaps and bounds. And there were, 15 people starting this month and 15 next month. And it was just exploding. So, as you can imagine, you need people to lead people. And so those opportunities were there. And it was what I recall a fairly brief conversation with my leader, who I'm not sure really wanted to be a leader, but with my leader about whether that was something that I would be interested in, and so I said sure, right. And my first team was small, probably 3 or 4 people,
Hmm.
and just eventually you move into the leader of leaders positions, which is obviously more challenging and a great opportunity, and also came with some personal learnings. And leading leaders, you have to take a step back and let them lead their teams and then be able to coach and guide them. So it was good. I know one situation I was asked to take on leadership of a team that was very independent. They were outside of our department, but they were going to be moved into our area, and they clearly didn't think they needed a leader. They had a team leader. They liked her, um, and they were very resistant to the change because they weren't COBOL programmers, and the top of mind for them was, "You're going to make us use the mainframe. You're going to make us be COBOL programmers," and that was not my intent. And it didn't ever actually happen. But that was a good challenge for me because I had never been in a situation where I had to lead people who really didn't want to be led. Right? They thought they were fine.
Yeah.
So that was just a good opportunity to figure out how to earn trust from them,
Yes.
and partner with them and figure out where did they need my help and where were they actually just perfectly fine. So great learning experience.
Yeah, it must be a challenge when you're like I know of having been made manager of different teams where they liked their current manager, and then I was
Hmm.
kind of put in a situation where I became their manager or their manager's manager, and I definitely there were challenges with that. Most people like me though, so it wasn't like hopefully it wasn't I didn't have a terrible reputation as a manager, but it's just different, right? And they've bought into
Yes.
somebody before. And I guess they've got some people do have preconceived ideas. It sounds like if they were expected to all of a sudden they were going to be doing loads of COBOL programming, I imagine,
Yes.
that's probably not a huge turn on for a lot of people.
Even
And
back then,
so
you're right, it wasn't.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I remember I when I first was in recruitment, I started off in tech recruitment, and we had the department that just would do COBOL mainframe, and then somebody else would do mid range, and so all these technologies that are kind of more legacy technologies now, they were all kind of some of them are real hotspots of finding people, right?
Hmm.
Too. Having said that, people tend to want to move on from those legacy technologies as quickly as possible. How did you, was there anything particularly you did to sort of build that trust or to sort of break those preconceived ideas?
Some of the things were super basic. A little bit of it was body language.
Hmm.
They were a fairly formal team, and so they'd come into the meeting room and sort of just be ready to defend. And so just sitting back and listening to them was really powerful in that case, and just building up that collaboration and helping them understand, hey, I'm not here to come in and change you or reduce expenses or tell you everything in your strategy was wrong. I'm here to listen and help you understand how very similar activities are being done over here, and maybe there's some synergies and we can work together. So it was really body language and listening and following through on commitments and having their back. So not unlike other leadership positions I've had since.
Yeah, I think that ability to be empathetic, right,
Yeah.
and having good communication skills, but specifically good listening. I was always taught two ears, one mouth, use them in that order. I don't always do
Yes.
very well at that. Um, but it's so true, right? If you listen to people and sit back and be conscious about that, you find out a lot more. You kind of disarm them, and people feel like, well, I mean, they're literally being heard. That's what
Mhm.
you're doing. So that's great. So somebody else, let's say there's somebody in that position where they're maybe their company, I mean, first off, I guess being in a company that's growing and bringing those opportunities is going to really help. You know, if there's somebody in a position where they want to put their head above some of the other people that are also interested in becoming sort of leaders or managers, is there anything in particular that you think you did, or anything in particular that you've seen other people do under, you know, that have worked for you that
Sure.
has been really good?
Yeah, I mean, I think about volunteering. So, volunteering in employee resource groups within the company, volunteering in industry groups like uh, ISA or something outside of the company. Those are going to give you really good skills, create some relationships where you can say, hey, I did this and I'd like to have a chance to formally lead actually as part of my day job. um, they create great opportunities. So for me, I've always been a joiner. I've always wanted to be that. In college, you had the group projects. I always wanted to be the leader so that I could kind of get things done. And so that I never shied away from that, but some people do. I don't know that anyone who truly wants to be a leader is going to shy away. They're going to learn to pick when they raise their hand to lead and when they're just part of the team. And I think learning that's good. You don't want to always be the leader. You're overcommitting, and there's perhaps some downsides
Hmm.
to always being seen as the person who wants to control how things get done. Or sometimes I've seen people who want to take credit for the work that the teams actually completing. So I think that balance of knowing when do you really want to lead, and have some passion around it. Don't
Hmm.
just be the leader so you can be the leader. Be a leader because you have something to add to that conversation. And also, I will say sometimes you get in a group, you look around, nobody wants to be the leader because nobody feels like they're expert enough. And that's okay. There's some sort of quote about teaching is the best way to learn. And I think it's okay. Raise your hand, be the leader of something you don't know anything about, because you will learn it and you will find a creative approach to make sure everybody learns it and that you get the job done. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I think, like, you've almost touched on a point about, you know, there are times when, like, just because you're you know, you're the most technically gifted in a particular area, or even like I look at recruitment or sales and think, just because you're the number one salespeople doesn't necessarily make you the leader. Now, people might want to follow you and copy some of the things you're doing that's successful, but you could be a terrible manager. And I've seen that
Hmm.
plenty of
Hmm.
times. And so, you know, if you are in a group and maybe you're not stepping up because you don't feel that you're the strongest person in that group and the subject, but nobody else does, or the strongest person isn't necessarily the person that needs to be a manager or even wants to, then you're right. Somebody needs to step up, and often, you know, I think, but being a manager is about building the right people around you. So you can't know everything. You know, a CISO isn't going to be able to do everything and know everything, but they're going to need to have the right people around them that are specialists in different areas. And so, yeah, right. You say just time. There's a time to put your hand up, and there's nothing wrong with also not. We should say there's nothing wrong with not being a leader, and then at some point in your career it changes.
Right.
You know,
Exactly.
you don't. People don't necessarily, and I'm sure people will watch this, and most of them will be thinking about leadership, but there might be people watching this thinking, "I've got no plans to be a leader," and that's fine. There's no harm in building the skills in the meanwhile,
Right.
because you think
And there's
something
no
might
harm in
change.
trying it, right? Because sometimes people will recognize things in you that
Hmm.
you don't recognize in yourself. I know there's been times where I've asked people to step up and lead and try, and they've been hesitant to do so. Sometimes they don't hate it as much as they think, and sometimes they love it. So, giving everybody the opportunity to try is a good strategy as well.
Yeah, I love it. Now, when did you like get that opportunity to sort of move up and become the CISO, and what did that kind of look like in the
Yeah,
business?
it's great. The interesting thing that I think some people might be surprised in is it wasn't a move up. So I was a director in IT, and it was a lateral move into the
Hmm.
CISO role. It came with a ton of opportunity to be sort of propelled forward, but it was really just a lateral move at the point in time. So I guess some advice I would have is don't be afraid to take that lateral move into
Hmm.
something else. It doesn't always have to be a promotion. My personal development was huge. It gave me the opportunity to talk more with our executive team across the company. I shortly began talking to a committee of the board, and then later the full board. So there was a lot of opportunity. And from that director level, in our organization, that looks like assistant vice president and vice president CISO. So there were definitely opportunities to move up, don't get me wrong, but that first move was lateral. So there wasn't a lot of, you know, personal risk of doing poorly at that point. It was more the opportunity, what can I do next? And now I always tell people my job is fun. Sometimes they look at me like I'm crazy. But you have the opportunity to talk about our cybersecurity externally, internally, escalate, influence, all kinds of things.
Was there a lot of competition for that opportunity, or was it kind of a natural move?
I had a conversation with my boss years after I took on the role, um, and he shared with me that there were three
Oh,
candidates. So I don't know if you consider that a lot or not. It was only posted internally, so there were three internal candidates. I only know one of the other candidates, and they have since retired. I don't know who the third candidate was.
hopefully they're still with the business, but I don't know,
Yeah,
maybe they're a CISO somewhere else, right?
yes, that's possible.
I think I mean, you obviously you don't know the other two people, but do you think there was anything in particular that you did that kind of popped you above, or did your boss ever tell you what it was?
Um, there were a couple of things. When I joined the leadership team of my boss, I was the only female. And so while that wasn't the first thing top of mind for him, he was a very early supporter of diversity
Hmm.
in our company. And so I think he was like, hey, if I could get a female, that would be great. Otherwise, his leadership team would have all been male, no diversity at all.
Hmm.
So he told me that that was one of the considerations, and then experience in our business. So that was another consideration. I happen to know the one candidate I know was always like in the infrastructure area, and so hadn't been out to the business. And there's lots of differences in the business because they are growing businesses that are looking at strategies very differently than how we look at strategy from the at the time from the core of the company. We're trying to serve many masters, and they're more like running their own business. So it was different in how you prioritize work and things like that. So those were two things that I remember. The other thing is I did have a previous reporting through up to my boss back in, I don't know, I want to say it was like 3 or 4 years after I started with the company. He was the CIO of our area in the health IT area for, I think it was 9 months or something, a very short period of time. And then he got some larger responsibilities and moved on. But then fast forward to roughly early 2000s, and he was the executive sponsor of a project that I was working on. So I had regular meetings with him as
Hmm.
the project sponsor, and so we had that ongoing relationship. The project happened to be around data masking, so again, a little bit related to security. So I think he had some confidence that I would understand the subject matter
Yeah.
because of my previous experiences.
Yeah, there's so many things there you kind of touch on that I think are key, like the actual diversity within the business, first of all, right? Having all of
Yep.
those different areas and supporters, and I guess to do a really good job as a CISO, you need to have good relationships with all the different business units, right?
Definitely.
And so having worked in a lot of those, I'm sure there's some stories there, but I'm sure
Mhm,
having
mhm.
worked in a lot of those, you've already got those relationships. It must help, and you're seeing it in a multi-dimensional way. I love the fact that that you're a woman and he wanted more diversity as well, and he was conscious about that. You mentioned that the previous CISO was a woman too,
Mhm.
and I
Yep.
think almost I feel like this is some of the power of what we're trying to do. I have a daughter, right? And if my daughter wants to go into cybersecurity, if she wants to be a CISO, then great. I support that. but also like I want her to be able to see similar people to her, and perhaps having had the previous successful CISO being a woman, it made it much easier for him to see a woman in that position, and that's part of what I'm doing here, right? I want people to see different people from different backgrounds that look different and have managed to make it to become a CISO, so that
Mhm.
people can see, not only personality types, but people that actually look like them that can achieve that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think keeping those contacts. When I speak to a lot of CISOs that are maybe looking for positions, or directors or deputy CISOs that are looking for that step up, the first thing I talk to them about is, right, who are you still in contact with? Like, who do you speak to? Who are your previous bosses? Where do they work? Because they're the people that they know what you can do. Better the devil you know, as they say,
Right.
and you know that what somebody's capable of, and if they can bring you in, do they know you're looking? Right? Can you have a conversation to tell them this is what you're looking to do? And when they're in that position, maybe they can bring you with them, and that's not uncommon. I got a friend of mine that just recently got a position for his old CISO, as a deputy CISO, with the plan that eventually, as the CISO retires, he'll be stepping into that role. And it's all about keeping that network and
Mhm.
connections together, wherever they go, whether that's within the business or out of it. So I think it's important. I don't think too many people are bothered about, like, conscious. I think most people won't burn bridges, I should say, but I think people sometimes just lose that connection, and that's easy to do, but it's
Yeah.
important to work
Yeah.
where you
I agree.
can on it. Now, you said that the CISO position was a sideward step for you. Have you ever had to take
Yes.
any sort of backward steps? Because I look at some people that are laid off right now, and they're sitting there thinking, I don't know where I am on my career plan, you know. And I encourage them, or also I get a lot of people come to me and say, I want to be a CISO, but they've never been a CISO before, and that is a
Mhm.
tough sell when you've got a bunch of experienced CISOs that will go into those CISO positions. So I think sort of a sidewards or a backwards step can sometimes move people forward, but I don't know whether you've had any experience of that.
Um, I haven't had any specific experience from a pay grade or job level. I will tell you, when I took the CISO role, it was not what it is today. So it
Hmm.
was 2008. And the level of authority and influence, and even visibility in the company was far different than what it is now. So I was taking the step into a little bit of the unknown. In fact, I asked my boss during the interview, I said, "Is this a role that you'll expect me to retire from?" And he laughed and he said, "No, but I think like 3 to 5 years, because it's a complex space and I really want somebody who's going to learn from it." But in my head, I thought that previous CISO hadn't been all that visible, and she came from a less technical background, and having tech technology move so quickly, I was concerned that I would be anointed CISO, sort of put over here in the corner, and I wouldn't get to be involved with any of the emerging technology
Hmm.
processes or initiatives. And of course, the fact of the matter is security is integrated in all that stuff. And I had to keep up on that as well as keep up on all the cyber stuff. But it definitely felt a little bit, and some people probably thought it was a little bit of a backward move at the time. And so trying to figure out the lay of the land, relearn our company from it with a different lens, that cyber lens, was huge. But for people who have taken what they might call a backward or a sideways step into something, I think it's the same. Like, do your best in whatever job you're given, and don't think about that shift. You're probably the only one thinking about it. It's not like everybody's talking about it around you. You're probably the only one that it really sinks into. And so I think just get your mindset to do the best job in whatever role you're in at the time.
Yeah, there's an element of a lot of people overthink think things, and you get paranoid about it, and how will this look on my resume, instead of asking really what the question is is this a good move for me? What
Right.
opportunities does it give me? I've seen CISOs and people that have worked hard to get the CISO title at companies where they're not they're not got a huge team, they've not got a huge budget, they might not even have any direct reports, could be all third parties, but they've got the CISO title, and some of them get stuck on like, "Oh, okay, my next job's got to be a bigger CISO role," and actually there could be opportunities for you to be an amazing deputy CISO at a really
Yes.
large company.
Yes.
One of my friends that took a deputy CISO role turned down a CISO role at another company to take that. And I know he's very pleased he did that now.
Mhm.
But that's a hard move to take. And usually you have to be self-confident in you've asked all the questions and you're doing the right thing for you and whatever you need right then and there.
Exactly
What
right.
did you have any sort of major turning points that you can think about in your career, like things that happened to you, either that you caused or it just happened anyway, that you think really sort of pushed you on?
Yeah, I think before I was CISO, I was given a great opportunity to learn our business and get embedded in the business for a 6-week training program, um, for people who would customer service oriented people who would use the systems that my team and I were creating, and some of my peers as well. And so when you are behind the keyboard using the system, you notice things that weren't built into the system. And so it took me back to my days at the University of Iowa when I got that first system. And I was like, why is this like this? Who did this? Can we do it this way? But that was a great turning point because I really got deep into the business that my team and I were supporting, and I could truly understand how they got from A to M and all the things in between. So that was a turning point, and I have referred to that over and over because it gave me that sense of who we were working for, what they went through to learn the systems. That one day there was a misspelled word on one of the green screens, and I just was like, "Oh my!" So over lunch, I went and I told somebody on the team, like, "Fix this now!" Right? It was horrifying for me. But as CISO, there have definitely been several times during my career where I felt I made a difference or improved some skills due to mistakes that I made. I think, when you call out gaps and make suggestions, it's got to get the attention of the right people to take action, and that's definitely something I had to learn. You can't just tell people to fix things. You have to help them understand, why are we doing this? Our customers are counting on this, or perhaps it's regulatory, or perhaps it's something that has become a 0-day exploit or something such as that. So that's always been important. Like the first time that like I helped people understand why we needed to do things, and instead of being like, we're too busy, um, we've got all these things to do, it was like the light bulb went on, and they got it done, and they understood why. There was a story that it stuck with me, back 15 years or so ago. One of our policies and standards was around multi-factor authentication. Of course, we've got multi-factor authentication regulations, everywhere now. But at that time, our policy was, you need to protect any confidential information that's outside of our company using multi-factor authentication. And a group had come to us and said, well, we don't want to store things here. We want to store them in this some sort of file sharing type site. Um, okay, what type of information is it? Well, it's highly confidential information. Great. But they didn't want to use multi-factor. And so help them understand, this is why we use multi-factor. It's very easy for a criminal to break in if you don't have multi-factor. And you just told me it was highly confidential information. So eventually they got through, but it was one of those times where my team had already shared this with them. They didn't like it. So somebody knocks on my door, like, hey, your team said this, thinking they could sort of sweet talk their way through it. And it was like, it, no, like, I can't help you here.
Yeah.
And they did it. And I don't know if they would remember it, but now when you think about how we think about multi-factor authentication now compared to how we thought about it 7, 10 years ago, that friction is pretty much gone, because people understand that it's really important to protect things with multi-factor. So that was sort of a turning point, because it gave me the opportunity to sort of just say no, but also to help them. This is why we do it. You just told me it's important. I don't want you to lose it. So let's just do it, type of
Yeah.
thing.
It's like that
Um,
painting a picture, right? You're painting a
yeah,
picture. It's like a salesperson, really. You've got to sell back to them why it's an important thing to do. I sit there and think one of the first, like when we're, so part of the business of my business does penetration testing. And one of the things we always ask is, obviously, why are you having the penetration test? What's
hmm
driving it? What are the things that you need to protect? Where are your crown jewels, sort of type thing. And I think getting them to start thinking about that often gets them moving a little bit further past the, we're just doing this to check a box, to, oh, this is why we're doing this. And I imagine with multi-factor, especially in those kind of more earlier days of it,
yeah,
it was exactly that.
right, right.
Yeah. And now of course you've got things that are really sticky that absolutely force you to have multi-factor, and
hmm
you just have to do it every day, and so it's a lot easier.
Yeah,
The
and we
interest
went, yeah, we went from we don't want it to, well, we know we have to have it sometimes, but if we don't have it, sometimes the lack of friction caused people like, that's all I have to do. Shouldn't I have to do more? And now, of course, it's just built in, and we have different ways to do it that are, less cumbersome and less friction for customers or employees.
Yeah, I love that we've moved on and improved on what we're doing and made it, and people have thought about the experience of the user
hmm
to do that. Now, moving on to sort of, you've been a CISO for, how long have you been a CISO for now?
16 years.
Okay, 16 years. And I know that when we spoke, you told me you're sort of involved with the ISACs and,
Yes.
and some of those. I'd love to know if there's any particular CISOs that you're in contact with, or there's ones that you see from afar that you think are doing a really good job, and what it is about those that impresses you.
So yes, I'm not going to name names because I know too many CISOs.
And then the ones that you don't name will be annoyed. Why didn't you name me?
Yeah. I was just at RSA, like you mentioned, and had the opportunity to listen to a CISO talk about how he was, and it really wasn't just the security team, but it was really the company and how the security team was integrating with making sure generative AI was secured. And he did a fantastic job putting the story together and being able to share the ups, the downs, the this is where we're at now, it's not where we expect to be, or this is where we were, but we've improved. So I do think the CISO who can tell that story, who can be genuine and open, and of course some of that's going to depend on the audience and whether or not your company um, supports that sort of information sharing. But just the down to earth nature of how he shared it, and after the fact, he said, I mostly pulled those slides from other internal communication decks that had been already created. It's very humble. It wasn't my work only type of thing, but the way in which he told the story was great. So I do think that's very, very important. You mentioned earlier CISOs that are leading with small budgets and small teams. I think they deserve a shout out. I know a
Mm.
few of them. They have to be really scrappy. They have to repeat their message over and over. And sometimes it doesn't work, right? So they do take on some personal risk there. But they are always, what I find is they're maybe not so much you, because maybe they're looking for new jobs. But when I talk with them, I find that they're very strong believers in the mission of their company. That's why they're
Yes.
there, and that's why they take on this risk or these headaches or frustrations, because they passionately believe in what they're doing. So I definitely admire them. And maybe a third one. I also had the opportunity to share this with somebody at a dinner at RSA, and their response was, "Really? And those who have served in the military or served for a government, whether it's the US government or other governments, I really admire them. Many of them will serve in the government for a while and then they'll go work in the private sector, but they bring a really interesting perspective. I don't have any of that background. And so I think their perspective and the knowledge of how those things work and how work gets done in that situation, I really admire that experience and their service to their country.
Yeah, it's true because I think, look, we know the government and often defense don't pay as competitively
Right.
as the commercial world, and so they are making a sacrifice to do what's right. And I know people that are CISOs of school districts, CISOs of states and cities, and yeah, they're doing an amazing job. And sometimes, as we talked about, the ones that are sometimes one person CISOs that are using third parties for everything. Yeah, a lot of them are really passionate about what they do. We see some of those when we're doing the pen testing because obviously they use us to do the
Yeah.
pen testing for them. And we're talking about the team and who's doing it. And they're like, well, actually, it's just me, and I'll use
Yeah.
this company, and I'll bring this company in to be, when we're going through the report, and they'll be the ones that will help me, get some of the fixes in and stuff. So yeah, you're right. And it's definitely come up that there are almost like different CISOs for different companies. Like the CISO is just a job title.
Right.
Bit like in our industry, we say security engineer. That does not tell me what you do,
Right.
right? And CISO, people feel like it tells you what you do, but in different companies and different industries, it's such a different job. And I'm sure
Uh,
if you put a startup CISO in a government CISO role, they probably would struggle, right?
Scratch their eyes out,
Right,
probably.
exactly, yeah. But then likewise, you might do it the other way around. If somebody's used to a lot of bureaucracy and getting things moving, and all of a sudden to be thrown in and everything happens immediately, and the expectations are different. Yeah, I think it's interesting. Maybe we need to do some CISO swaps.
Right. That'd be interesting.
Yeah. Well, look, I know I asked you sort of before about this, and it's something that I've been going out and asking a lot of CISOs. I think I've asked over 500 now, and most of them have been polite enough to reply. But and you kind of hinted at maybe a little bit even with your last sort of answers. But what are the top three attributes that you feel a successful CISO needs?
Yeah, probably this goes beyond CISO, but if you're not already continuously learning and a curious person, definitely need to develop those skills, right? Things change so fast and you don't need to know everything, right? But understanding how are you getting the morning security news or the evening security news? Like every day you should get something, whether you're relying on somebody from your team to push it to you,
Mhm.
or you're reading certain publications or listening to certain podcasts on your morning commute. It's really important to be curious enough to catch those things at least a few days a week. You really also, beyond that, in the moment sort of learning, is be able to think about what's going to happen 3 years from now, right? Many CISOs are not too overly concerned about AI right now. It's AI in the future. What's going to happen when it gets into the hands of the criminals in a way in which we haven't yet seen? How are we going to need to protect and defend against it? So being able to process a large amount of information, synthesizing what matters, what doesn't, maybe who to give certain things to, what to take on yourself, really, really important. And then I did say earlier, like business acumen, right? You really have to understand your business. What is important to protect at the business that you're in, and what is lower risk. And so truly understanding how the business operates is important, as well as important to get through to the people in the business if you have key priorities or initiatives or action that really needs to be taken, or just things for their awareness. So I think that ability to influence is important, as well as thick skin. I tell people that I have thick skin. I have 9 brothers and sisters, and so there was really no time to worry about your feelings being hurt. And you have to think about it from somebody else's perspective. If they don't like it, if they tell you they're not going to do it, and it's really important to you, you go back, you figure out, how am I going to get it done? How am I going to reintroduce this such that they understand why it's important? So you have to come back and be resilient, do it over and over again.
They're yeah, it's interesting. I'm sort of building a top 10 out of these, and definitely those three all figure within the top 10. The resilience factor, the business factor is probably the most common one I get. I'm not going to put them in
Mhm.
any order, but
Yep.
if I did, that would certainly be sort of number one. Uh, and then that sort of continuous, I call it the CICD, which I love calling because everybody thinks of the SLD,
Right.
the development life cycle. But it's that continuous improvement, continuous development, keep on looking
Hmm.
back at what you can do. Now, you mentioned sort of RSA and seeing these talks and people talking about AI and things like that. Obviously, that's definitely one way that you can improve that. Are there any other ways that you think people can sort of develop themselves? Anything that you've done that's kind of really worked for you?
Oh, I've done everything from watching YouTube videos, taking online classes. My team has been awesome in terms of helping me understand things, asking questions. It's trite, but no question is a dumb question.
Mhm.
Um, Being, I think, vulnerable enough to ask questions when somebody's just spoken over your head, technically or otherwise. It's backing them up and being able to say, this is what I think you just said. Did I understand that correctly? And if you can't do it inside the meeting, do it after the meeting, right? Or after the phone call. So, um, I think those things are things I've used. Industry conferences, absolutely. I'm in a number of different CISO peer groups where the sharing is sort of closed door sharing, and that's a great place to get information about what's actually happening in companies and how people are thinking about solving the problems, or to take our problems and say, here's what I've got. Have you ever run into this before? What do you think about it? What should I be doing?
Yeah, I think getting to those as a leader, if you can get into those leadership sort of conferences or like a lot of conferences have sort of a side conference or something going on with a lot
Yep.
of leaders in. So I think even as a developing leader, as somebody quite senior in the business, looking for opportunities like that to network, but also to learn and sort of stay on top of your game is important. And then what about
Mhm.
the business? Like you're somebody that's seen a lot of different parts of your business, which kind of led you in a really strong
Yeah.
position for where you are now. Um, what should people be doing to make sure that they've got the business knowledge, around the places they work?
Sure. I think everybody likes to talk about themselves, theoretically at least. So I think if you want to, if there's an area of your business that's a mystery to you, find somebody in that area and say, hey, can I buy a cup of coffee and pick your brain? I just want to better understand how these things fit together. Most people will find that 15 minutes, 30 minutes of time, and they'll give it to you for that cup of coffee or not, because they're experts, right? And you're
Yeah.
asking them about themselves and then how what they do contributes to the bottom line of the business. So in our company, there's a lot of company-wide communications that are developed to help all employees understand how do we make money, how do we help people plan for their retirement. That stuff is very much available, so that then becomes sometimes making the time to seek that information out and learn. But generally it's not hard, especially we're a public company. Information's out there, you can Google it and learn. A lot of people will do that anyway on their way to interview for a new company, or
Yes.
they'll find people that they know that work at that company. um, yeah, that's the best advice I have on learning the business.
Yeah, I think that's good. You're definitely right. As a public company, it's probably a lot easier, but internally, that just buying a cup of coffee and talking to other people in different business units, as a security person, you're going to want to know that because there might be areas that you've not even thought about securing
Right.
that could be your next headache.
Yep.
So
Yep.
that's good. And then developing thick skin, the whole resilience thing. I mean, a lot of people are doing that right now, right? There's been layoffs in our industries, right? That's what you're doing. You're developing your resilience right now. And uh,
Mm.
for anybody that's in sort of challenging times, I assure you that. 99% of people look back at those, and it creates a different path and moves you into a different, better opportunity. So, I mean, keep working on that. But anything people can do to build their resilience, other than trying to get laid off, because that's never a good idea.
I think it's really important to have trusted people that you can confide in when things
Hmm.
don't go the way that you anticipated them going, or something like a layoff occurs, that you can uh, express your disappointment, express your frustration in a closed loop of friends or colleagues without it impacting your future, right? So it's okay to have those feelings. That would be very unnatural if you didn't have those feelings, and then be able to pivot and go back to that trusted group to say, okay, here's what I'm looking for. But I agree with you. Now, I have never been in that position, and so I'm not the most authentic voice saying this, but I have had so many friends who have said it's the best thing that ever happened to me, like
Hmm.
being laid off, being fired, being downsized, being demoted, whatever that we just humanly think of as a bad thing that happens to us from a career perspective. 9 times out of 10, it's like best thing that ever happened to me. It just took me a while to get there, right?
Yep.
And so I do think thinking about that and having the positive mindset is this will work out eventually, and just being able to take one day at a time to find your next opportunity would be the advice I would provide.
Yeah, but it's funny though, people don't really talk about that. Of course, they don't talk about being fired, but like many
Hmm.
people have been through that situation. Including like both the people that were on my RSA panel were joking that they were part of the been fired club. So yeah, I mean, look, a lot more people go through it than you'd expect. And I think that's like a
Yes.
lot of things. So I did my ISC2 CC exam, it's just the certified
Hmm.
candidate. So obviously I'm a recruiter, I'm not a technical person, but I've been in the industry for so long, since 2012, just doing this, that you kind of build up some knowledge. You can't help but do that when you're taking job descriptions and talking about
Sure.
projects with people. And so I did all the studying, and I found it very challenging, for me, but I felt super confident going into the exam. And then when I sat the exam, I was like, "Oh my goodness, this wasn't in the study stuff. What I don't." I truly came out of that not knowing whether I'd passed it or not. Um, and I had, but I don't know by how much. But it was really, I was like, I really don't know. And I went in thinking, I've got this, no problem at all. And then I started talking about how hard it was to achieve it. And all of a sudden, I had all these people messaging me that hadn't talked about it publicly. And they were like, oh, it took me 3 goes and it took me twice. And because in my head, I'm thinking, well, it's the ISC2 beginner
Hmm.
exam. I should absolutely be getting it. And yet there was all these people that hadn't got it first time, and were technical and were in technical roles. And so it was interesting. We don't always talk about our failures and stuff, but we probably should do more of that, because it takes failure to sometimes learn how to progress and do better the next time, right?
Absolutely. If you don't fail, you're never going to improve.
Yes, right. You got it. And then so, I'm not expecting that to be the career advice you would give yourself, but I was going to ask, like, if you went back to early career Meg, and could give early career Meg any advice other than buy Amazon stock or whatever,
No.
um, what would be the piece of advice that you'd give yourself?
Probably to find advocates in my company for no matter what job I was in. I think it's really important to have people you can check your ideas with and get input on. They might tell you, no, don't do it this way, do it that way. Ideally, people that might be in the room where you're making a recommendation or suggesting a change, and they can help drive the message and support the message in a way that you can't. And probably early in my career would have felt like that was cheating a little bit, right?
Right.
It's my thing and I'm going to do it and I'm going to help everybody understand and they're all going to get it. But when you have that other voice that says, oh yeah, we had this conversation and I support it, and it's super powerful. So that's great career advice for people who are early in their career that may have thought like I thought.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? That kind of wisdom and confidence to actually go and ask people for that, and to
Hmm.
bring people in. It's something that you don't, early career, it just doesn't come naturally. Yeah, it does feel like a bit like cheating, right?
Yeah.
When in fact the idea really is, as long as you're morally and ethically doing the right things, every way to cheat yourself into doing a better job is making yourself probably better at what you do,
Right.
right? So
Right.
it's got to flip
Right.
the script a little bit and look at it a different
Hmm.
way. So I've got one final question for you.
Okay.
And thank you, first of all, for sharing your story.
Sure.
It's been really interesting. I've loved speaking to you. But the very final question. So you've been a hiring manager for a long time as well now. And there's a lot of people out there that are trying to just stand out from a sea of applications, and they're trying to really get themselves seen, which is a challenge at the moment when a lot of these jobs are
Right.
having a lot of applications. What advice would you give to them? What do you think that they should do that would help them stand out?
So when I see resumes, I really like to be able to scan them and find the things that make that person unique. I think it's okay to be creative, but this is kind of a nit, and maybe this is a controversial opinion that I have, but I don't think the resume itself should be a distraction. So I don't want to see any fancy fonts and pictures or graphics or, pie charts seem to have been a little bit of a trend. That doesn't really work for me. It makes me question that approach, but it wouldn't make me not talk to somebody. It's just not driving me to say, oh yeah, this pie chart looks great on this one. But most important, I think, is really to know people. So the resume is a tool. It does help you get looked at in organizations, but I think it's better to truly know what happens at that company. Do I know anybody at that company? Am I allowed to reach out to the hiring manager? Which I don't mind when people reach out through LinkedIn or other channels. For me, sometimes I can help direct, sometimes I can't. And that's usually unrelated to the candidate themselves. It's really the logistics inside of the company or the timing. Um, so I think those people can help share your resume. They can maybe even post. I've seen several who will post on LinkedIn that somebody in their network is looking, and you'd be lucky to have this person work at your company. So I do think those personal relationships are truly important. And it takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of, like we said earlier, sort of that personal vulnerability to say, hey, I'm on the market again. I'm looking. Here's what I'm looking for. Do you have time to help me, or do you know anybody? And then circle that right over and over and over again. So that'd probably be my best advice.
No, I love that. Hopefully, this doesn't cause you a flood of LinkedIn messages. I saw Meg on the Route to CISO podcast.
That's
I saw
right.
you on there, and you said, um, "Yeah, the resume thing. First of all, I think you're spot on with that. I've spent my 25 years looking at resumes. I tried to work out one day how many resumes I'd seen, and I don't. It was just an insane amount, because you think about, I get at least 10 resumes a day, and I have done for 25 years. So you can do the math on that,
Hmm.
with some good vacation time, I would say, in between,
Yeah.
and not looking at resumes for sure. But I've had to look at a lot of them, and I've always felt in tech, and especially in cybersecurity, on the engineering side, if that's what you're doing, keep it simple. I've always been a
Hmm.
keep it simple, like 2 pages. If you're really experienced, you've got a lot to say, three. But pie charts, no thank you. Columns, no thank you. Fake
Thank you.
crazy fonts, no thank you. So absolutely, you're so spot on with that. If you work for I guess if you're going for a head of marketing for a cybersecurity solutions company, you might want a pie chart, or you might want something that looks a bit more marketeering, but engineering wise, absolutely not. Right.
Mhm.
So yeah, totally agree with that. I think the networking and trying to put yourself in a position where somebody takes the time to take your resume out of the pile and actually take
Hmm.
a look at it, that's really going to be the difference maker. I had InfoSec World. I've spoken there I'm going to speak there this year, and it'll be the third year. In the first year, I bought a load of people that were in their very first cybersecurity career roles. It was a very different
Hmm.
panel. I haven't seen it done anywhere else. And I had these four people talking about how they got into cybersecurity in their first position.
Hmm.
And it was really interesting to hear their stories. And something that really came out, I had one person that had over 400 applications, but they had the success from networking and meeting people and going to sort of chapter meetings and that sort of stuff and
Hmm.
reaching out over LinkedIn. And actually, the success they got from all 400, they had very, very few interviews and things from that. The actual ones that were successful, the ones that they networked into. And so that's 100%, a thing, and it's 100% what people need to do. And I actually think the LinkedIn thing and having being conscious about what you post, having a brand, but being authentic as well,
Hmm.
helps people get to feel like they know you,
Yeah.
because they're going to look at your LinkedIn anyway. And so you might as well make it an extension of you if you're going to do that. So yeah, I
Right.
absolutely love those. Thank you so much. It's been really enjoyable
Yeah.
and really interesting.
Very fun. Thank you.
So it's great to have somebody that's worked their whole career in one company and that had that progression throughout, even with the sideward moves and stuff. People don't think that when you're in one company, you necessarily have moves that are anything other than just like a standard ladder. When in
Yep.
fact, I don't think I've
Yep.
spoke to a CISO yet that's had anything that looks like that anyway. Um,
Well, I'm unique.
yes, love that. Thank you so much, Meg. I appreciate your
Yes.
time.
Yes. Great to talk to you, Chris.
Thank you for listening to the Route to CISO podcast. If there's something you really want me to ask on the next episode, or if you're a CISO who wants to inspire the next generation, please reach out. I'll leave a URL to my LinkedIn profile and make sure you connect and message me there. We're always looking for feedback, so please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.